Greetings. Today is 5/31/2019. It is Omer Day 48, and we are approaching the final Sabbath, the seventh Sabbath. 7 complete Sabbaths. The other day when I was contemplating some scriptures, I was thinking that one of the things that I wasn't 100% sure on was what 666 means. And I believe that the Messiah answered my question pretty quickly and basically showed me that 666 is speaking about DNA. In Revelation 13, I think it's around 17 or around verse 14 to 17, it talks about the mark of the beast and his image and name. And when you look into the Greek concerning that, name is pointing towards marriage. Number is pointing towards the 666, which it's not saying that it's a number of a man. It's saying that it is the number that makes up a man, meaning our DNA. Carbon 12 has 6 electron molecules, 6 proton, 6 neutron. 666. And carbon 12 is basically the most abundant thing that makes up our DNA. So what he's telling us is that he's pointing us that the 666 is our DNA. Okay? Now, when you study it and look into it, because the beast is Apollyon. Alright? He comes out of the abyss when he's released, when the chains are taken off and he's unlocked, and he comes out for the final consummation of this age, the final judgment. He gets his 7 years. He gets his jurisdiction for 7 years, kind of like a last meal for someone on death row, same principle. And he's allowed to run amok for 7 years. And he views humans as inferior. And we see that in Revelation 17:16. The word hate in Revelation 17:16, well, let me go to that quick. Okay, so this is the English translation here in Revelation 17:16 is very misleading. It says, and the 10 horns, which is the 10 rebel angels that get kicked out of space from the war in heaven, the war in space, which you saw, and the beast, this is Apollyon, coming out at the 5th trumpet, right here where it says, these will hate the harlot. Alright, this is a poor translation into the English, very misleading. Because a lot of people think that the beast and Babylon the Great are at war, but they're not. Babylon the Great, the harlot, the mother of harlots, is created by the beast because they take the beast's image, the mark. But anyway, this in the Greek, these will hate. What it's saying here is the angels will view humans as inferior, not hate them. I mean, ultimately, they don't like humans, but that's not what it's saying right here. It's saying they will view humans as inferior and force them to take the mark, which is make her desolate right here. This is saying that they force her to take the abomination that makes one desolate. And then naked means it removes their ability to put on the garments of salvation. That's why they're naked. And that's why the angels are warning humanity in Revelation 14 not to take the mark. Because it will strip you of your ability to put on the garments of salvation and leave you naked. Okay? And then this term, will eat her flesh. That is, once again, another very poor translation into the English. What it's saying here is it removes humans' humanity. Okay? And then they don't burn her up with fire, in reference to the harlot, which is people who take the mark. The beasts don't burn them up with fire. They lead them into the wrath, and eventually to be burned up by the fire of the Almighty when the Messiah comes down to tread the winepress, and then eventually they all get thrown into the burning fire. But the beasts lead them there. They don't actually do it themselves. They just lead them into the wrath of the Almighty. So the beasts, the fallen angels, and the rebel angels who are thrown out of heaven, space, they view humans as weak. And like I said in the past videos, the first 3.5 years of the Beast of the Sea Empire, I believe that is strictly the conquest of humanity by the evil angels. I don't believe there's any human involvement. You got to take into perspective what happened to Earth for the 7 years of the seals, the trial, and you got to take into perspective what happens to Earth with the sixth seal. So you got major death and destruction with the first couple seals. Then you got every mountain and island being moved out of its place with the sixth seal. And that's because of New Jerusalem coming through the massive wormhole in space. And it interrupts our rotation, which affects the G-forces that hold our crust relatively stable. So basically what's happening is that the whole crust of the earth, when New Jerusalem comes through the wormhole, because it affects our rotation, the whole crust of the earth wobbles on top of the liquid magma. And that's going to cause massive devastation. And that's when the Messiah is talking about the waves roaring. We're talking major tsunamis, major destruction. And then plus the space debris being forced to Earth from the opening of the wormhole, which is the sixth seal, part of the sixth seal. The stars falling from heaven like a fig tree being shook by a mighty wind, shaken by a mighty wind. So you have the devastation of the falling stars, You have the devastation of the first couple seals, all the death. You have the devastation from the Earth's rotation being affected by New Jerusalem coming through the wormhole, which is Isaiah talking about the Earth staggering to and fro like a drunkard. So you have all that death and destruction just from the seals. All right? Because you got to take this into perspective. And I'm saying all this because humanity, when the beasts are released, when the fallen angels are released, humanity is barely going to have the strength to lift a piece of food to their mouth. They are not going to be mobilizing for war. All right? They are not the ones surrounding Jerusalem. It's not Turkey or Iran. It's none of that. Humanity will barely be able to wake up in the morning and put their clothes on. That's how it's going to be like the worst zombie movie, the worst apocalypse movie in real life. Okay? So you got that massive destruction from the seals. Then there's the silence in heaven, which is in between the seals and the war in heaven. And then you have the war in heaven, which however that occurs, whatever occurs, I'm not 100%, but what I am sure of is that North, South, and Central America are completely annihilated. Right? And the same thing, you got to take into perspective. You know, a little rock, you know, the size of a house coming from space is like a gigantic bomb going off. I mean, they scientists theorized that the asteroid that killed off the dinosaurs was only, you know, about 8 miles, or I think it was like 8 miles big. So when we see here in Revelation 8, when the first angel sounds the first trumpet, hail, fire mixed with blood thrown to the earth. Third of the earth was burned up, third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass burned up in this area it's talking about here. All right, and North, South, and Central America make up 1/3 of the earth. Okay, so what it's saying here is that North, South, Central America are completely annihilated with the first trumpet. The fallout from whatever happens in space completely annihilates North, South, and Central America. And this term, all green grass is burned up, that's saying all flesh. That's cryptic for all flesh in this area dead, burnt up. Okay, then people that have, them people in the past who are having dreams of America being burnt up, it's not from nuclear war. It's not, America's not Babylon the Great. It has nothing to do with any of that. It's the first trumpet. It's the fallout from the war in heaven. But there's no worries because the Messiah's people won't be there for that, since they're removed at the seventh seal. The rest of them, those that remain, and the dead. Okay. So, North, South, Central America completely annihilated. Then the second angel sounded the second trumpet, and a great mountain. All right. Like I said, got to take this into perspective. A mountain hits the Pacific from space, coming down from space. An asteroid the size of a mountain. What this is, I don't know. Is this Gog's ship, or what this is, I don't know. But bottom line is, it's a mountain and it hits the Pacific. And like we said before, if you take into perspective that an asteroid only a couple miles long, or big I should say, destroyed all the dinosaurs that they predict. Now we're talking about a mountain hitting the Pacific Ocean. Complete and utter destruction. And we went over this in past videos, how it, you know, the tsunamis basically engulf most of Africa, almost all of India probably, completely swallows Australia and New Zealand and all that, and Japan, and goes into Asia. America's already destroyed, so that doesn't matter. Okay, so I'm saying all this is because the armies that surround Jerusalem is the centaurs that come out of the abyss with Apollyon. And ultimately they're his children from the time prior to the flood. Alright? It is not humans. Humans, you know, there probably won't be any electric. Humans are going to be so beat up at this point. 8 years, 7, 8 years of just total annihilation. And then a couple months after Apollyon's released, then I should say 5 months after Apollyon's released, then the rest of the fallen angels come out, and they immediately conquer everything and kill all humans outside of their jurisdiction. Which is basically sounds like parts of Asia, Russia, and maybe Northern Europe. So, complete annihilation, complete conquest of humanity. That's what the beast of the sea is. The sea, speaking of the abyss. It's the beast from the abyss. That's the first 3.5 years of the empire. And it's a complete conquest of humanity. Alright? There is no peace. There is no sacrifices and offerings at the temple like people try saying that the beast takes them away. No, there is none of that. The daily sacrifice is believers. And the oblation or the offering, whatever you want to say, that's a separate. There's like we talked about before in Daniel. There's two different taking away of the sacrifice. The first one that starts at 1290 when the sacrifice is removed. That's talking about the day of redemption. The daily sacrifice, believers, are removed. And then at the halfway marker after the beasts are released, it says that he puts a stop to the sacrifice and the offerings. The sacrifice is the 144,000 because they sacrificed themselves to do the mission, 1260-day mission, and the offering is the new believers that they win. That's what it's talking about. It's not talking about literal temple services. Like I said, there will be no temple services. The beasts immediately surround Jerusalem and conquer it, and he goes in there. Where is there any temple services? I mean, they annihilate it, they conquer it, they destroy it. So for the first 3.5 years, they are conquering humanity. They are not buddies with humanity, and it's all unbelievers at this point. Because like I said, the Messiah's people are removed at the seventh seal, the day of redemption. So the only thing left on earth is unbelievers. And they're getting hammered. And the 144,000 get sent back, and they're protected in their vessel or ship, whatever it is, in Bashan, and they're winning people to the Messiah. But in the beginning, it's all unbelievers. The beasts are conquering humanity. They're not buddies with them. All right? And even when the mark's set up, they're not buddies with humanity. They are forcing people to take the mark. And it's very clear. They force all to take the mark. And if you don't take it, they kill you. Period. This is the final separation of human flesh. Revelation 14:12-20. It is the final separation of human flesh at the halfway marker of the 7 years of wrath. It is the transition from the beast of the sea into the beast of the earth. Because the beast of the sea, it's strictly an empire of the wicked angels from the abyss. The beast of the earth, now they're mixed with humans because humans are made from the earth. And it's the iron mixing with clay of Daniel. Alright, so my point is that they are not working with humans for the first 3.5 years. It's completely a conquest of humanity. And then even when they set up the mark, they're still not buddies with humans. They're forcing them to take the mark. Alright? So, because they view humans as weak, and this is basically, the 7 years is a preparation. Because they must have made a decision way back when they chose to rebel against the Almighty. They must have made a decision, a pact, that they were going to try to usurp the throne of the Messiah by conquest. And this is what they're sticking to. So they're viewing humans as inferior, so they want to make them tougher. Iron mixing with clay tells us the iron is strong. So they want the humans to be tougher is what it boils down to, because they want to try to physically, via war, usurp the throne of the Messiah. Okay, so the beasts, they make the image, which when you look into the ancient Greek, it's basically a prototype. But like I said, when you study it, it's genetic manipulation is what it is. Alright? And when the humans take it, it removes their humanity and changes them into hybrids. And that's exactly what Daniel, the iron and clay mixing, that's what it's talking about. It's talking about the humans when they take their mark. It's manipulating their DNA to be like the fallen angels. It removes their humanity, and Jubilees 5:3 and Enoch 8:2 shows us. Okay, so right here, Apollyon, the Antichrist, the original one, who influenced the angels and humans to rebel, basically. It says, impiety increased, fornication multiplied, and they transgressed and corrupted all of their ways. That's what his influence did. Okay. And then in, what did I say? It was Jubilees 5:3. 5:3 it says, the angels of the Almighty saw them on a certain year of this Jubilee, that they were beautiful look, but they took themselves wives. Oh, excuse me, that's 2. Alright, here we are. Lawlessness increased on the earth, and all flesh corrupted its way. Men, cattle, beasts, birds, everything that walked on the earth. And like I said, I believe that this entity was genetically manipulating flesh, splicing, gene splicing, making chimeras. All right, that's why we see that in the mythology, because I believe that there's elements of truth in mythology, that type of stuff was occurring from the time of Eden until the time of the flood, which was 2,000 years. That's a long time. A lot of weird stuff was going on. And it says, all flesh corrupted its way. All right? And you can see by the description of Apollyon's children, the Centaurian army that comes out of the abyss with him, because Enoch tells us that his children are locked up with him. So that's his children. They're chimeras composed of human, lion, horse, scorpion, and bird parts. I mean, it's right there. I'm not making it up. I'm just relaying what it says. They are chimeras. And I believe that this is how the flesh was corrupted. And the Almighty didn't want the mixing of species. You know, he pointed that out in Genesis. Each to their own. All right? So that's why this was another lawless sin that the fallen angels committed. And why the Almighty was so upset with them. Didn't even, you know. The weird part about it is they knew what they were doing and they still did it anyway, but what can I say? So Enoch 9:5 shows more of the corruption, and Enoch 10:12 shows that the Almighty puts the whole crime on Apollyon, the Antichrist. Enoch 9:5 and 10:12. Okay, so we go to 9:5 right here. It says, "You have seen what he done, how he has taught every species of iniquity upon the earth." See? Species. "And has disclosed to the world all the secret things which are done in heaven." And then 10:12, "All the earth has been corrupted by the effects of the teaching of the Antichrist. To him, therefore, ascribe the whole crime." So this is when the Almighty was telling Raphael to bind him and cast him into darkness in the opening of the desert, which is in, and this here is east of Jerusalem. And like I said in past videos, I show you where this is. It's in Al Safa. That's where he's going to come out of at the fifth trumpet, him and his minions. Because basically Michael was saying to the Almighty, you made everything, you know everything. What should we do with these fallen angels? And this is the Almighty telling them what to do. So the Almighty says their children are going to kill each other, which is what they do. And then he's going to bring the flood, and then he tells them to bind this one, which is the Antichrist. He gets thrown into the desert with his children, which are the Centaurian army. And then he tells Gabriel to bind the others, which is right here. Okay. Because this here entity, or excuse me. Oh, excuse me. He tells Michael to bind the false prophet. This one's the false prophet. And then these are all the other fallen angels. And then they get thrown. They get bound too. And like I told you in past videos, I believe that is under Antarctica. And then it shows here that it's for 70 generations underneath the earth to the day of judgment, and which is the great day. And I showed you that in past videos that the Great Day starts after the seals, which is the 7 years of wrath. That's the Great Day. And then the final judgment is then being tossed into the burning fire for it to be completed. All right, so they come out. Their goal is to try to usurp the throne. So they want to force humans to take the mark, to get stronger, and plus then they have complete dominion over what's left of the earth. All right. So Revelation 13:17-8 talks about the name, the number. All right. And when you look into the Greek, this is basically saying that it's a marriage of humans to the genetic splicing, to the image. All right. And the number is actually the for man, it's talking about the carbon-12 molecule, which is pointing us to DNA. But the number would be the gene markers for the beast, for apollyon, because the image is the prototype of him to be mixed with humans. And so that's what this is telling us right here. It's the mixing of Apollyon's DNA to humans to make humans chimeras or hybrids, whatever you want to say. So then we see that Revelation 13:14-18 is telling us that the angel of the abyss, the Antichrist, Apollyon, will force all humans to become hybrids or be killed. Thus, all humans alive after the mark is set up will be wicked harlots, because the fact that they take the mark means they're worshiping the beast. Because they're in the wrath, humans are forced with life or death. And this is exactly where the Messiah is talking about. Those who seek to save their life will lose it. So they save their life by taking the mark, but then ultimately they lose it because they get tossed into the burning fire. And then those who lose their life will save it, meaning those who refuse the mark get killed, but then we see them getting raptured, reaped up, and join us in New Jerusalem. And this here separation of all human flesh is what creates Babylon the Great. There is no Babylon the Great before Revelation 14:12-20. So anybody saying America's Babylon or the Vatican's Babylon or the internet's Babylon, they don't have a clue what they're talking about. Babylon the Great is created by the mark. Period. I mean, right here. It's right here. On her forehead, a name marked abomination. This here is telling us that it's the mark of the beast. It's very simple. So, and then we also see, so Revelation 14:12-20 is the separation of all human flesh. Those who take the mark are gathered and thrown into the winepress, which is the bowls of wrath, but it's actually more like pitchers pouring out, like a pitcher for water or tea, pouring out. That's actually what it's telling us. It's pitchers of wrath, and the Almighty's pouring it out on the beast and Babylon the Great. So the ones who take the mark get gathered and thrown into the winepress, which is the wrath of the Almighty. And the ones who refuse the mark, the beast kills. And then they're all dead, which is where the blood is in the streets. and they immediately get raptured up to immediate as in that time frame, which is the tabernacle pilgrimage, and they get taken up to New Jerusalem to join with us. And then after that, that's when the bride hath made herself ready. So that means all the people who are the Messiahs are now in New Jerusalem after that point. And everybody else is gathered and thrown into the winepress. Then the Messiah comes down at the end of the wrath, the end of the 3.5 years of the beast of the earth, and he treads the winepress, which is when he kills all the humans who take the mark. He kills them all. And we see in Malachi where it talks about when we come down, we're walking on their ashes because they get destroyed. And he sends out his angels to bind the fallen angels and throws them into the burning fire because they already lived out their 4,000 year sentence, which is the 70 generations that Enoch tells us about, or Jubilees, whatever one that was in. And then he binds the dragon, which is Gog and the other rebel angels, and they get bound and thrown into the abyss, so they're locked up for 1,000 years. But see, their sin wasn't as great as the fallen angels, so they only have to be locked up for 1,000 years. Then they get released, and they once again make this same mistake, and they gather up all the evil spirits, and they try to come against the Messiah again in the camp of the saints. But this time the Almighty just rains fire down upon them, consumes them, and then the rebel angels get bound and thrown into the burning fire, and then the earth is cleansed. No more evil. It's all been cleansed at that point, and that's when the Almighty comes down in New Jerusalem and tabernacles with us, because it's all clean. Heaven is cleaned at the war in heaven, which is space. So there's no evil in space because it gets kicked down to earth, thrown down to earth. And that occurs at the first couple trumpets. And then the earth is cleansed at the end of the 1,000 years. So then it's the new heaven and a new earth. It's not a literal new heaven and a literal new earth. It's a renewed, cleaned, no evil. It's been dealt with, cleansed. And then that's when the Almighty comes down and tabernacles with us. So as we see, the DNA doesn't mix well between the angels and the humans. Daniel 2:43. So since we're on the subject of DNA, I'm going to go back over the who Israel is. Because the Almighty tells us over and over that everything is His because He made it all. Right? The universe, the planets, Earth, it's all His. And because people come from the earth, we're His. Right? And if you understand DNA, the Y chromosome that comes from the paternal, the male side, it's virtually unchanged over thousands of years. So what's my point? Is that the Y chromosome that men have, it's virtually the same exact Y chromosome that comes from Noah. And Noah's was the same one that came from Adam. So like to pretend that Israel is a bloodline, you know, that they're somehow different is just a stupid argument. And Genesis 17:7, Galatians 3:29, it tells us who and what Israel is. All right. So here we are. Genesis 17. And this is when it all starts. Okay? So the Almighty appears to Abram and says, I am the Almighty. walk before me and be blameless. There's the terms of the agreement. Walk before me and be blameless. And like I told you guys in past videos, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they were basically abiding by the terms of the agreement. It wasn't until they were in Egypt for 400 plus years, where they assimilated into the Egyptian ways and took on their gods, is when they strayed from being blameless. And that's what brought the necessity of the law. Because Abraham already had it from the angels. That's why we see Jacob observing Pentecost way before Pentecost was instituted. As far as we could tell, or I should, according to the scriptures. But we know this from Jubilees. And like I said, it was as if the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls was the spiritual conception of the end time generation. Because the Dead Sea Scrolls started to be discovered in 47, and then the next year, the final generation is birthed. And it's like we needed that knowledge to be completed, to be able to put all these things together. So, right here's the terms. Walk before me and be blameless. And like I said, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and even to an extent the sons of Jacob were doing their part. It wasn't until they assimilated into Egypt is when they transgressed and started playing the harlots. All right. Then he says, I will establish my covenant between me and you. Then he says, I will multiply you exceedingly. Okay, he's fulfilled that promise. Okay. As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, Abraham. Not Israel. It starts with Abraham. This is the covenant. Right here. He says, my covenant is with you. You will be the father of a multitude of nations. You will no longer be called Abram. Your name shall be called Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. So he's fulfilled this already. I will make you exceedingly fruitful. He fulfilled that. I will make nations of you. He fulfilled that. Kings will come forth from you. He fulfilled that promise. He says, I will establish my covenant between me and you. And now here's the kicker. And your descendants after you. And he keeps repeating that. And your descendants after you. And your descendants after you. And he says, I will give you the land of Canaan. He did that. He fulfilled it. Here's the kicker. Terms of the agreement. You shall keep my covenant. You and your descendants after you. This is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Okay? So, this is telling us what Israel is and who Israel is. Okay? Israel is people of the covenant. And who are they today? Your descendants after you. Because it all starts with Abraham, not Israel. All right. So then we see in Galatians 3:29, who the descendants after you are. For you are all sons of the Almighty through faith in the Messiah. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free man, neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ. And if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's descendants, heirs according to promise. So this tells us who Israel is. Abraham's descendants. That's who the covenant was with. That's who the promise is to. Galatians 4:23. So there was the son of the bondwoman that was according to flesh. But then there was the son of the free woman through the promise. Okay? Meaning the promise, like Paul tells us. Is this Galatians 3? No, this is 4. The promise that Paul tells us in Galatians 3 was the seed. And like he says, it was singular. Right here. The promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. This is what Paul's telling us here. Meaning, the promise is the Messiah. It's not DNA. It's the Messiah. And this is where it came down through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, down to the Messiah. So let's see here. Then Hebrews 8 shows us what the new covenant is, who the new Israel is. All right. And like I said before, if you try using that ridiculous term replacement theology, well, then you don't have a clue of who Israel was in the beginning. And I'm trying to show that Israel is not a bloodline. It is not DNA. It is a covenant. It is people of the covenant. Okay, Hebrews 8. So it says, but now he has obtained a more excellent ministry. Because right here he was talking about how Moses, when he was on the when he was visiting with the Almighty was giving him basically architectural designs mirroring the things of New Jerusalem to build with their tent of meeting, etc., the tabernacle that was able to be transported in the wilderness. Okay, but he says, but as he is also the mediator of a better covenant, which has been acted on better promises. For if the first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no occasion for a second. For finding fault with them, he says, behold, days are coming, says the Almighty, when I will effect a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant which I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt. For they did not continue in my covenant. See? They did not continue keeping the terms of the agreement. And what happens when you violate a contract? Done. So they didn't keep the terms of the agreement. Right there. For they did not continue in my covenant. Terminated. And I did not care for them, says the Almighty. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Almighty. I will put my laws into their minds. I will write them on their hearts. I will be their Almighty. They will be my people. And they shall not teach everyone his fellow citizen and everyone his brother, saying, Know the Almighty, for all will know me, from the least to the greatest of them. For I will be merciful to their iniquities, and I will remember their sins no more. When he says a new covenant, that means the first one is obsolete. Because they didn't keep up to the terms of the contract, so therefore it was terminated. For this reason, he is the mediator of a new covenant. And then he talks about where Moses established the first covenant at Sinai when when Israel agreed to the terms, and they said, yes, we will do it. And then that's when Moses set up the altar, and he did the bloods of calves and goats and all that stuff, and did the rituals. Okay? But that was just, all that was a copy. Alright? And then he tells us here. The Messiah did not enter a holy place made with hands, a mere copy of the true one, but he entered into New Jerusalem itself, into the literal city of the Almighty, into the literal temple of the Almighty, to the literal altar of the Almighty. Alright? And he doesn't do this, he doesn't have to do it every year, like the copy that they used to have to do. His was a once and done deal. And it says, he has been made manifested to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. So see, he already put away sin. It's already been done. Okay. Therefore, when he comes into the world, he says, sacrifice and offering you have not desired, but a body you have prepared for me. In whole burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin you have taken no pleasure. Then I said, behold, I have come. In the scroll of the book it is written of me to do your will. So he takes away the first covenant in order to establish the second. And it's been sanctified, ratified by the offering of the Messiah once and for all. And he went down and sat. He took away sins for all time and is seated at the right hand of the Almighty, waiting until he makes his enemies a footstool for his feet, which is what is about to commence. Like I said, the first seal is a transition from grace to a war footing. Of course, there will still be mercy and grace for those who come to him, but all those who missed the first rapture, which is 90% of Christianity, for the 7-year trial, they're going to have to be refined and purged, or both. This is the covenant I will make with them after those days, said the Almighty. I will put my laws upon their heart, and on their mind I will write them. And their sins and their lawless deeds I will remember them no more. There is no longer any offering for sin, because the Messiah did it once and for all. So when you take that, and you go to Romans 11 and you read verse 26, and so all Israel will be saved, just as it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion, he will remove ungodliness from Jacob. This is my covenant with them, the new covenant, when I take away their sins. Well, when did he take away their sins? Paul's saying it. It's a done deed. All Israel has been saved. This is not future. Israel equals people of the covenant. People who have faith in the Messiah and abide by the terms of the agreement, which is obeying the commandments. New covenant, new Israel, people who abide by the terms. And the terms are revealed flat out. They're revealed flat out in Revelation 14:12, which is keeping the commandments and faith. But it's all throughout Scripture. The Messiah tells us all throughout Scripture, obedience, doing the will of the Father, obeying the commandments of the Father, obeying my commandments, which his commandments are pointing us to obeying the commandments of the Father. And like Paul was telling us in Hebrews, when you receive the Spirit of the Messiah, he writes his commandments on our heart. And then there's people out there trying to teach us not to obey the commandments that we're exempt from it. Meanwhile, he tells us that the Sabbath is perpetual, meaning everlasting. Same thing with the feast days. Perpetual, everlasting. So, once again, modern day churchianity, 90% of Christianity, they are the same exact manifestation of the Pharisees in the Messiah's day. And the reason being is because they do not keep the commandments. And since they don't keep the commandments, the Messiah has not manifested himself to them. And that's why they seeing, they see not, they hearing, they hear not, nor do they understand. And when truth is staring them right in the face, they would rather turn away and go back to the regurgitated vomit of the doctrines of men and lick that up rather than truth. Same thing as when the Messiah was standing right there in front of the Pharisees. They acted like they were the final authorities on the law. Meanwhile, the law stood right in front of them and they didn't recognize him. Why? Because they were blind. Why can't churchianity understand these things? Because the Messiah has not manifested himself to them, because they're not keeping his commandments. So they seeing, see not, they hearing, hear not, nor do they understand. They can't draw near to the Almighty because they won't keep his commandments. So he won't draw near to them. So the Son's not revealing the Father to them. Once again. And the time's coming down to where preparation, it's past due. Now it's a matter of the message. You know, whether or not I go in the first rapture or not, doesn't matter. What matters is this message, which is faith in the Messiah and abiding by the terms of the agreement of the covenant, being a people of the covenant, which means obeying the commandments. What commandments? The commandments that the Almighty gave to Moses at Sinai. When he said, this is what they are, and then Moses came down and gave it to the ancient Israelites, and they said, yes, we will do it. That's it. Those commandments. And failure to accomplish this is why churchianity is so confused and weak. And it's been so for hundreds of years. The Messiah is not manifesting himself to a majority of Christianity because they are shallow in relationship with him and not keeping the commandments. He views them as lawless workers of iniquity. And the trial is meant to refine the foolish virgins, because they just need a little refining. And then for the 90% who are harlots, I'm talking about Christians, they're actually harlots, 90%. That harlotry needs to be purged out, and then they need to be refined. And that's what the 7-year trial is meant to do. Because, I mean, just look at America. The Almighty blessed us with America. The Messiah blessed us with America. And then you have people out there causing dissension, spitting on America, and they call themselves Christians, saying America's Babylon the Great, and all this nastiness, you know, take delight in talking about how America's going to be destroyed and all this stuff. Not supporting the president who's fighting for the people. They can't even see that he's from the Almighty to fight for us, to lead us in the fight. And they don't have the eyes to see because of this right here. John 14:21. I mean, the scripture tells us that someone who doesn't take care of their own household is worse than an infidel. Yet you have people hating on America, and it's supposed to be their home. Calling America Babylon, but yet they won't pack their bags and leave. That's like the epitome of hypocrisy. You're saying you're a Christian, but you're spitting on the gift that the Almighty gave to us in this wonderful country, and then you're calling it the opposite of the blessing that it is, and then you don't have the decency to pack your bags and leave. Same thing with Roe versus Wade. A person, one person who only made up probably about 1% of America at the time of what they believed, because 80% of America in the 1970s were Christians. Now that one person who represented the 1% overcame the Christian majority of 80%. And then not only did they overcome it, but that abomination of a law has been allowed to continue for 40 plus years. You think the Messiah takes pleasure in that? Or then you have at least half of Christianity voting for a political party who hates Christ, inviting despicable minions into their pulpits to support one political party that hates Christ. And you think the Messiah is okay with that? That he's going to let you on into the open door in heaven? Yeah, come on in, even though you're spilling innocent blood and doing every other wicked thing in the book. Yeah, come on in. No, that's not how it works. And the reason why these people can't see these things is because the Messiah doesn't reveal himself to them. Because they're not keeping his commandments. And just to make all you aware, voting for a political party that hates the Messiah is worse than sinning itself. Because if you tell a lie or don't observe the Sabbath, that's just you. But when you vote for a political party that is clearly anti-Christ, hates the Messiah, everything Scripture stands for, they're the opposite. When you vote for that, you are voting to legislate laws that hate Christ. And we have you who call yourselves Christians, we have you to thank for your stupidity. Why? Because the Messiah is not manifesting himself to you. Because you don't keep the commandments. And probably worse, you're teaching others that we're exempt from it. That it's Old Testament stuff. Meanwhile, the Messiah says it all throughout the New Testament. Paul says it. John says it. James says it. Revelation says it. I don't take pleasure in saying this, who knows? Maybe I won't make the open door. It doesn't matter what happens to me. It's this message is what matters. And it's on behalf of the Messiah. The Spirit of the Messiah is leading me to speak this message. Faith in the Messiah and keeping the commandments of the Almighty. Alright, well, I'm gonna do another video about the seventh Sabbath, and I'm gonna start working on that now, and hopefully I'll get that out before Sabbath tonight. Alright, till then, take care. The will of the Almighty be done in the name of his only begotten Son, Yahushua.